Hey everyone, this week I'm running through some of my favourite images from 3 of California's best national parks. So if you follow my channel regularly, you'll know that I recently went on a trip to California, and a couple of weeks ago I put out a video where I was sharing street photography images from San Francisco. If you haven't seen that one, I'll put a link up top. And this week I'm going to do a similar thing, but it's going to be shots from the national parks. So on the journey we went to Yosemite National Park, Kings Canyon National Park and Sequoia National Park. I have already published a video from Yosemite where I was at Tunnel View getting shots at both sunrise and sunset, and I'll put a link up top to that one as well. But in this video there are some different shots, a bit more variety from around the valley in Yosemite. And like I said, there's also Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon. So let's take a look at the images. So we're going to start with this one in Yosemite. We've got the Merced River there, and in the background I think that's part of Cathedral Rocks. So what I really liked about this one was the gradation and layers of colours. You've got the blues in the sky and the rocks with these dark green trees, and then in front of that you've got these lighter green, yellowish, smaller trees with the browns and oranges of the river at the bottom there. And that really caught my eye, was the main reason I captured this shot. Perhaps it would have been nicer to have more of the mountains in the background, but I wasn't really able to get any higher from where I took the image. From a post-processing point of view, I've softened the image quite a lot, so I've reduced the clarity and texture sliders in Lightroom, and that's just helped to soften all of the leaves, and it gives it that really nice painted-like texture to it. I've also brought down the highlights in the sky, because that was quite bright when I took the initial image, and that's helped to balance against the darker areas at the bottom of the image. And I probably brightened up the shadows a little bit from the bottom with a linear gradient going up from the bottom to about halfway, just to bring out some of those black areas. This image was captured one morning on a walk to Mirror Lake, although Mirror Lake wasn't actually there because of the extreme temperatures. It had all dried up, but it's still a nice walk. And on the way, walking between all the boulders and trees, just behind a tree I saw this pileated woodpecker, and it was quite calm and tame really. It didn't fly away when it saw us, just went about its business, pecking at the tree. And I was using the 24-200mm Z lens, so I was able to use the 200mm end and keep a reasonable distance to get this shot. It has been cropped down a little bit, but it's still retained some decent resolution. I brightened this up a little bit because it was fairly dark under the trees. Just brought a little bit of detail out in the shadows around the bird's feathers and the eye, and I've also added a little bit of clarity there as well. But other than that, I've not really done much to this. I've not altered the colours or changed the white balance much in any way. And I'm just really fortunate to get a good clean shot of it that was really nicely in focus. So yeah, I was quite happy with that one. This is one of 2 more images I've got to show you around the Cathedral Rocks area. We'd gone for a really nice walk in these meadows, which are at the foot of the mountains there. It was really hot, probably up to around about 40 degrees. But it's such a nice area and it's so photogenic, and you've got this really epic scale. And I was really trying to capture that scale in my image. I didn't have a wide angle lens with me, so I was using the 24mm end of the 24-200mm Z lens. And as we were walking back to the shuttle stop, there's a shuttle that travels around Yosemite Valley. We were heading back to the shuttle stop. We passed the meadow here, so we were walking along the side of the road, looking towards the mountains, and I spotted some people in the middle of the meadow there, and realised that just really helped to set off the scale. Without that, it obviously still looks very grand, but just having the people there just totally emphasises just how massive the walls of the valley are. And in the end I didn't really need the wide angle lens. 24mm, which is still fairly wide I guess, did the job. With the post-processing on this image, I've done what I don't normally do, and I've raised the dehaze level. So quite often I will bring the dehaze down because I don't want it to look too oversaturated or too contrasty. But this image did have a lot of haze, particularly in the mountain areas at the back, and you can see it still looks a little bit hazy now. So I did just raise that dehaze level to bring a little bit more contrast and bring the blacks out in the mountains there. So this shot is obviously an ICM image, intentional camera movement. I captured this whilst panning the camera upwards with a slightly long exposure time. I think it was about 1/10 of a second. And as the camera was recording the exposure, just raised up the camera just to create this blurred effect. And I thought it really worked. The actual scene itself looked really nice. This was just taken in the campsite where we were staying, and there was some really nice side light falling on the trees. And I've made a video previously where I was capturing some ICM images in the Peak District near where I live in the UK, and it was similar lighting on that day, so I knew that I could capture a similar ICM image with these conditions. It really helps to have that strong light on one side of the tree and the shade on the other side. And it was also a little bit misty still, so you've got that nice faded background with the blues there and the hazy blues, and it helps just to make the trees in the foreground pop out, stand out a little bit. So that really helps with the ICM image. And I've altered the colours just a little bit. I've brought the blues down to make them slightly more turquoise than they were before, and I've also reduced the clarity a little bit, but I raised the texture, and that just gives it a little bit more of a painted quality, I think. I really like these type of images. They're really fun to do, and it's something a little bit different. I also liked the image just as it was, without the ICM effect, but I decided to put the ICM one in this video just to mix it up a little bit and show a bit of variety. Alright, so this is the last one taken down at Cathedral Rocks. This is a 3-shot panorama, stitched together, 3 images. Like I said, I didn't have a wide angle lens with me, so to fit everything in on this image with the mountains in the background, I had to take the 3 shots and then I've put them together later in Photoshop. I really like how you got the path starting from the bottom right hand corner, leading you into the image with a nice leading line there towards the tree, and then your eye goes up and you've got the huge mountains there in the background. It is a little bit washed out, this one. Like I said, again, it was just so bright, very harsh light that day. So I have raised the dehaze just a little bit on this image, and I've raised the contrast slightly as well. I've brought down the greens, the saturation of the greens that is, and also I've brought down the saturation of the blue just a little bit. And that was just to compensate again for the increased dehaze. One thing I could have improved with this image is just shifting the horizon line. It's very central in the image, and perhaps that confuses the viewer, not knowing which half of the image to look at. I wanted to include the mountains and also the leading line of the path, so that's why it is quite central, but perhaps I could have got lower, and that different angle would have just put the horizon line onto a third, and it would have been a little bit more pleasing for the viewer. So I've learned something there, and I'll think about that next time. So another image taken at the campsite. This bird was hopping around on the ground there, and I think it's an American robin, but I'm not 100% sure, so if you do know, just leave a comment down below. But I did find it quite interesting, with the dark black, almost blue feathers on the back, and then the brown chest, and its beak also with the black on top and the yellow underneath. Again, it was quite dark under the trees, and I've had to use quite a high ISO of 800. Because of that, the image was a little bit grainy, so before editing it, I've run it through DxO Pure Raw software to create a cleaned up image basically, which then I can put into Photoshop, and it's got much less noise. I did bring out the shadows a little bit because it was quite dark just on the bird itself, so I've not touched the background. I've selected the bird with the selective masking tools and then brought out some of the shadow areas and added a little bit of clarity and texture. And then what I've done is made the same selection but inverted it, so all the background was selected, and then I've reduced the clarity there, so it creates a nice separation, even though there was some separation anyway with the background being out of focus, but it just helps to emphasise that and soften the background areas and make the bird stand out and pop a little bit. So moving on now to Kings Canyon. This is just south of Yosemite. you've got Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park. They're kind of operated as one, and you can see both of them while you're there basically. It's a huge area, but you can obviously see bits of them. And this was looking out over the really rugged terrain. I really like how it just seems to stretch into the distance, and you've got all these troughs and peaks with the gradation of light between them and how they slightly fade away as they get into the distance there. So it was really just the layers in this image that really caught my eye. How you've got those really nice strong dark greens at the front, and they gradually start to fade away with each layer as it goes back into the distance, and it just almost blends with the sky. So this is another image where I've actually raised the dehaze. I said that I didn't do it a lot earlier, but on this trip it seemed that I did use that on quite a lot of the images. Probably because it was quite hazy in the evening light, and looking out over great distances with quite a lot of particles and things getting thrown up into the air. So it does get quite hazy in the atmosphere there. Because I've raised the dehaze, like I said, it's just necessary to reduce the saturation then. I've in particular decreased the saturation in the yellows, and it just helps to soften the image a little bit, makes it not too overbearing. So this was taken in Sequoia National Park, where you've got the huge sequoia trees. Some of them grow absolutely massive. The two on the left here are quite big, but not as large as they can be, and the other trees are obviously much smaller. But there was really nice light coming through the treetops, so the actual light at the time was quite harsh. If you were outside of the forested area, it would have been too harsh to actually capture any good images. But because of the shade of the trees, it was blocking out the light in most of the areas, but then letting it through partially in different spots. And the light was just shining down into the centre of this image here, where the tree with the orange leaves was standing. And I thought that was quite nice, as it was framed by all the other trees, and you've got that really nice hazy light just lighting up the centre there. I have emphasised that haze just a little bit. I've brought the dehaze down in the centre and the clarity, and I've increased the clarity at the left and right, just to create a little bit of variation in the image, make it a little bit more dynamic. And it's also a focal point. It brings your eye to that brighter area in the centre. And as I always do, I've added a little bit of a vignette to the image which further emphasises the brightness in the centre and draws you in. I've also softened the image a little bit, brought down the clarity and the texture, just to create that really ethereal look, and hopefully create that kind of really magical atmosphere. One of the things I wanted to do when we were at Sequoia was capture the ginormous scale of the trees there. They really are huge, but it's really difficult to do. As I said in a previous video, I accidentally took my 24 to 70mm lens instead of my 14 to 30mm because they look quite similar. So I didn't have a wide angle lens with me, which would have perhaps made it easier to get the huge scale of the trees into the image. However, I think I would have still struggled, to be honest, because you need to look up at the trees, you get distortion with the wide angle, you capture a lot of the sky in the image, which doesn't always give the best composition. So it might have actually been a blessing in disguise to have the slightly narrower focal length. And I was quite pleased with this shot at 47mm, because I think it does still manage to convey some of that scale by actually cropping in and just having the base of the tree. And you've got the people on the right hand side there for scale. So having it fill a really large part of the frame, and you can see just how massive this tree is. I think this is actually the general Sherman tree. So it's regarded as the biggest tree in the world. It's 83.8 metres tall, I think, and at its base is about 31 metres in circumference. So it really is huge. I do recommend going to see it if you can, because even in images where you do manage to convey some of the scale, it's still nothing like actually seeing them in person. So I really enjoyed the time there, and I was quite happy to come away with an image that I felt conveyed a bit of that scale. Another one in the forest at Sequoia. This one's all about the textures. I really like how the light is catching these wispy little branches that are growing off the trees there. And these trees are not particularly big. But like I said, it is just about the texture for me in this one. I tried to make a nice composition so that all the trees were evenly spaced and balanced within the image, and it's just nicely framed with the bit of green at the bottom there and at the edges. And you've got a brighter spot in the centre of the image. I have reduced the highlights on that bright spot in the centre, or just off centre, but I think it does help just to draw your eye into the image, and I've darkened the edges again with a vignette, which also helps to do that. I think this image might work as a black and white. I haven't tried that yet, but it might be nice to have a really contrasted black and white version of this, so that's something to try in future. And so finally, this image is another one from Kings Canyon. This was taken from a panoramic point not far from the campsite where we were staying, and you had to take a drive up a very narrow, windy road that snaked its way all the way up the side of the mountain until you got to the top, looking out over this amazing view. You've got Hume Lake, I think that's Hume Lake at least, in the centre there, and then you've got all the mountains in the distance. And we went for sunset, so we got these great colours. The sun was actually setting behind, but because we've got these nice clouds in the sky, they were capturing some of the light from the sun going down, and you also got that really nice golden light on the mountains in the distance there. It was difficult to get a good composition. There were other compositions where the rocks and trees were in more pleasing formations, but whenever I tried to create that composition, it was covering up the lake, and I really wanted to have that in there as well. So this was the best compromise that I could come up with in the end, and I am still fairly pleased with it. And obviously with the light as well, it really finished it off. And this was on the last night of our stay in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, so a really good part of our trip, and this image is a nice memory of that part of the holiday. So I hope you like those images half as much as I liked taking them, because it was a fantastic journey and we really enjoyed the trip. I've just got one more of these videos to share with you, and that'll be from the Pacific coast, going up from Monterey towards San Francisco, around Big Sur and all of the exciting coastline that's in that area. But that might not be next week, maybe in a couple of weeks or so, because I do still want to get out and do some woodland photography with the amazing autumn colours that we've got right now. I was hoping to do it this week, but we just haven't had the right conditions yet, so fingers crossed I do get that for next week. But that is it for this one, so big thanks for watching once again. If you are new to the channel and you're not yet subscribed and you'd like to do so, you can click down there on the big red button, or over here on this picture of me, and that way you'll keep up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning, 10 AM UK time. So I hope you'll join me next week for the next one, but until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.